Welcome everyone back to the St. Pete by Night Twitch stream where we play St. Petersburg by Night, a massive, massive multiplayer game of 5th edition World of Darkness, including Vampire the Masquerade, Hunter the Reckoning, and Werewolf the Apocalypse. This is After Dark, St. Pete After Dark, specifically, where we do behind the scenes interviews, we talk about storyteller tips, other content, and other things revolving around the World of Darkness, as well as St. Pete by Night. My name is Kent, also known as Mishikent on all social media. I am the lead storyteller of St. Pete by Night, but tonight I play the role of host, as I have a very, very, very special guest joining me this evening. You know him, you love him if you've been around the St. Pete by Night community for long enough. If you've been around TikTok long enough, you know exactly who I'm talking about. His name is Beara, also known as Beara the Bard. He is a professional game master, dungeon master, storyteller, and you can find him over on startplaying.games/gm/Beara.the.bard, where he runs D&D games. He's even dipping into the World of Darkness a little bit more with the experiences he's been having over on St. Pete by Night. And I am so, so happy to have him as part of the team. Let's go ahead and let him introduce himself. Beara, hello. Good evening.
Hello. Thank you for that lovely introduction.
Well, I'm just so thrilled to have you here. You were actually one of the first storytellers that was ever promoted on St. Pete by Night from just a player, someone who'd had little to no experience in the World of Darkness, if I recall. St. Pete being your first ever game, but your interest in it, your interest in expanding your repertoire, as it were, of games led you to wanting to become a storyteller. And I was so, so happy to bring you aboard. We'd been friends and followers on TikTok for probably at least a few months before that, and I had gotten to see just how creative and extremely talented you are, and so it was my absolute pleasure to bring you aboard the team. Kicking things off tonight, I guess I'd ask you, what kind of experience did you have with the World of Darkness as a whole before St. Pete by Night? Had you heard of it? Had it crossed your path at any point? Like, was it one of those games that you just kind of heard about on the periphery and then eventually got a full introduction to? Kind of run me through how you heard about the World of Darkness and how that led you to being interested in and joining St. Pete by Night.
So I did have a experience with it when I was in college, but it was very brief. I had just really started getting into D&D 5th edition. I had a table that we tried out a couple things, and I think it was 20th. We
Yeah,
tried to be
20th
vampire.
anniversary.
Yeah. A friend of mine had a book. We sat down, we tried character creation for about an hour, and the storyteller decided not their thing, so we just moved on. um, and I didn't hear about it again until I started seeing it on TikTok shortly after I followed you.
So, for those who don't know, the 20th anniversary edition of Vampire the Masquerade, there's also Werewolf, Mage, Changeling, all of the splats have a 20th anniversary at this point, was a kind of, I think, Kickstarter or crowdsourced project that was started to have the books reprinted and re released and kind of modernized by rabid fans who were fans of the older editions of the game. And so they got together, started crowdfunding the thing, and it became a huge, huge success, making tons of money and bringing, the World of Darkness, or at least the more traditional World of Darkness, back to life after it had kind of ended in the early 2000s. So a lot of people, when they hear about Vampire the Masquerade, if they hadn't heard of the new World of Darkness and Vampire the Requiem, they heard about the 20th anniversary because it was coming back. But we play the 5th edition game on St. Pete by Night. So what was kind of that transition? Like, you joined the server, you were curious about the game, and you were gracious enough to give me a chance to try and impress you and lure you in. What was your kind of experience like with the server at the beginning, and kind of learning about the world of darkness and transitioning into the 5th edition and creating your character and everything like that?
Yeah. So, pardon me. I I joined the server. I started going through the character creation process, and that's when I made Edwin, the Tremere. Um, First, it was very overwhelming, just because there was just a ton of lore.
Absolutely.
Just trying to get my footing there. But as I kept reading it, um, I made the character, didn't understand the style of the game we were playing, so Edwin was not really optimized for what we were doing. But it was a lot of fun getting to role play with everybody. The first Elysium, when you started narrating and going through that whole thing, I was hooked. It was fantastic. I enjoyed what you did with St. Pete and the setting itself, the way everything tied in, and the way that you were able to kind of guide all of the little pieces that were going across the entire server for a while. It
So,
was very exciting. Yeah, sorry.
so I should explain that when we started St. Pete by Night, for anybody who's new to the server or new and following along and kind of catching up on content, we did not play Vampire the Masquerade the way it was meant to be played. This was a completely new experience, and I think I probably should have warned players a little bit more in advance that what they were getting into was not going to be the traditional tabletop role playing type experience where you have a table with your set group and your set storyteller. But the truth of the matter is, I didn't even know what I was getting into. I was feeling it out as I was going along. What I had proposed the game to be initially and what it ended up being were two completely different things. Like, absolutely not at all what I expected. I had expected a more West Marches or West Marches style game where it was just I have a community, people can show up, and I would run sessions based off of whoever was there. What we ended up getting was a full blown community world LARP of a game. I had started with the expectation of maybe 20 to 30 interested players. We ended up having over 90, I think, at our first Elysium, with over 120 finalized characters and I think 200 something people on the server. And that was a lot. I also want to take a minute to say, if you are watching along live right now on Twitch, feel free to hit us up in the chat. The chat is live. We are taking questions as we go, so please feel free to submit those questions, and I will read them out loud and ask our dear guest Beara. But yeah, it was a wild experience to say the very least, and I think we did a pretty good job making the most of it and trying to make it work. And I mean, it's still running to this very day, so that's kind of a good thing. But you know as well as I that eventually we kind of hit a point where things had to change and we would revert to a more traditional table game, but still keeping the elements of that open world feel. But we'll talk about the revamp very shortly. I want to
Yeah.
ask, so you start playing the game, you get into a few sessions, and we have our first major streamed event, which was the SI raid. Outside of the Elysiums, we had the SI raid. And you were a very tricksy individual during that particular event, if I recall correctly. Kind of talk me through what you felt with that experience, because that was like our first major arc kind of to be played out live on stream, and I think it ended up running like 6 hours,
It was
which
so
was
long.
absurd. And obviously we were still figuring out all the nitty gritty bits and pieces of it, but that was an absolute insane experience. What did you feel throughout that whole process?
I hmm. So the majority of it was the actual just planning of what we were going to do, and there was a lot of chefs in the kitchen in that one. Um, and then as soon as we started everything, it all just kind of fell everywhere. um, I think when I built Edwin, for whatever reason, I decided to lean into Obfuscate, which is not a Tremere normal clan tradition. So, which was fine, I think. I think it was playing all right. I think I just used him, like, particularly in that raid. I think what I did, I climbed up a building and ended up, I ended up on top of a truck.
You ended up on top of a truck,
Yes,
and you ended up breaking into said truck and finding some very, very specific artifacts that had been uncovered, and you were the one responsible for recovering those artifacts.
right. Yeah, I think I ended up doing that because I went to protect somebody and then I almost died and I just immediately retreated. I was like, this was not the move. And uh, you explained the truck moving on, and I was like, can I just climb on top of that? Because I still have the spider climb ritual
Yep.
activated. Uh, yeah, no, I think I was just trying to do something because it just everything just went to hell, and I was like, okay, I just need to salvage something from it. So I went after the thing that was trying to get away.
So you said that when you designed Edwin Kane, I found
Mhm.
that in the character creation and versus play, the character you start with isn't always the character you end up with. And those who are not part of the St. Pete by Night community, Edwin is now the Keeper of Elysium. So he is still around, even if he is an SPC or an NPC, for those who don't know the World of Darkness terminology. Uh, what did you kind of have in mind when you were building Edwin, and then how did you feel about him kind of as he evolved? How when practicality came in and you were actually playing him, did you find yourself having to make adjustments to the character as you went?
Something that something that I was initially going for in his design was I was going for like a information broker, which I figured would be something I might be able to pull off in a set in a game kind of built the way that we were running it, with as many active players at one time. Um, but I did not have the understanding of everything individually, like building the pool, how to figure out what would be the best pool for the build I was going for, and in guesstimation, I made a lot of little errors with it. So he didn't come out exactly how he was supposed to. He just kind of ended up turning into he was the guy who can go invisible and do some fun shit with blood. And that was about it. Uh, as he evolved, I started leaning into like the backgrounds. Like I didn't spend any dots to upgrade his physical traits or anything like mental social skills. I just put everything into contacts, influence, um, trying to just lean into that shadow entity thing. And that's what I ended up shortly after I think that the veranda is when I approached and I was like, he's not working as a character. Can I make him an SPC?
Well, and the verandas was probably our second major event, which I think we had over 90 people show up to that
That
as
was wild.
well. And it was supposed to be a group of like 10 max running that. And it ended up that it felt like the entire server showed up. So we were running like three different scenes with two storytellers, one who had just come out of the box in Oops. I had immediately thrown her to the lions and been like, just keep these people entertained while I'm bouncing around rooms and trying to make sure that this is all being managed. So you played for probably, I want to say, how long was it, would you say, you were a player before you really had gotten an interest in becoming a storyteller and kind of had reached out to become one?
Well,
Maybe six
I
months? 4 months? It was pretty early.
it was pretty early. I've been a storyteller longer than a player. Um, it was pretty much right after the veranda. I just don't know when that happened exactly. Because it was after the veranda, same thing as the first raid. I tried to do something immediately about got killed, and I was like, this is not what this character's for. And, uh, after a little while, I was like, yeah, no, we'll see if I can do that. And so I think that's when I reached out to you and was like, hey, do you have any spots for storyteller on your team?
And what was the motivation to do that? Was it just simply to kind of expand your repertoire into the World of Darkness and to learn more and kind of get some practice with the game? Or, what kind of inspired you to do that? Because I know it was a pretty big culture shock probably joining this game in the way it was run. What made you decide to kind of take that extra step and move up to storyteller?
Um, I had two, I guess, primary motivations. The first one, I enjoy over just generally when it comes to tabletop RPGs, I enjoy the role of storyteller, DM, whatever it is, over being a player. I think I just I don't know. I guess it's the not really sure. I guess it's easier for me to scatter my brain in different directions and track a table than it is for me trying to keep track of one individual for whatever reason.
And what was it like kind of what did you kind of think about moving from like D&D or the other games that you'd been running to World of Darkness? Did you find that it was a pretty easy transition system wise in terms of like running stories and storytelling, or was it kind of like a really steep learning curve and you had to get the mechanics down and practice them a little bit more?
It was a bit of uh, a jump. I hadn't had a whole like I've been playing Dungeons and Dragons since I was 9, started in 3.5. Um, I hadn't really had much opportunity to try out other tabletops. Honestly, this is I think joining your server was the first time I got to really dive into another setting. So yeah, it was a pretty significant jump mechanic wise. Like doing the narrative storytelling wasn't a huge jump for me, but the trying to remember how to determine what dice pool somebody would need given a situation. I think that was my biggest struggle was determining dice pools because I didn't do it right building the character.
Right.
So um but I think that was yeah, just the mechanics side of it. I think that was probably the toughest time I had transitioning.
Well, I think that's one of the beautiful things about being a storyteller, a game master, a dungeon master is that the core concept is the same everywhere. The idea of storytelling, the skills you learn in telling stories, in running games, at least at a base level, those can go to any setting and system. Learning the mechanics, the crunchy rules parts, yes, that's important. But I think that one thing that World of Darkness certainly features and is said in other rule books is the rules are just a guideline. Like those are just
Mhm.
a baseline. Really, the important part is that you're having fun, that you're telling a story, that you're enjoying yourself. And I think that you, among many storytellers I've worked with and talked to and learned from and played in games of, you have a knack for telling a really interesting and engaging story. For somebody who you say you get like being scattered like that, I feel like you do have an idea of a big picture. But we'll talk about that in a second. You brought up an interesting point about starting D&D when you were 9 years old. Walk me through kind of what got you into gaming. When did you first hear about TTRPGs? You said you started at 9, but what was your first game like? And kind of talk me through that early stage of you becoming a TTRPGer as a whole.
So when I was little, my best friend, he was kind of like an older brother. Um, we used to play games where we create like basically LARP. Kids do beat each other with sticks, stuff like that. But we were making up characters. We were creating worlds and stuff that we were exploring through these games. And my dad played advanced D&D when he was a kid, and he saw that we were doing that, and he pointed that out. And then a couple years later, they broke down and got the 3.5 like handbook and the Dungeon Masters for Dummies book. Um, and we sat down with the character creation. First campaign was absolutely atrocious. We didn't know what we were doing, but it was fun. It got me into role playing. Um, we actually that started a tradition. My family actually played D&D every summer until right before I graduated high school.
So I've found that most gamers kind of have a certain trajectory that kind of links them to TTRPGs, whether they're really into video games, whether they have a theater background like myself, or whether they're just really into the kind of fantasy or sci-fi genre. What was kind of your path? Were you really into like Tolkien and fantasy novels as a kid, or was it more video games? Like what was kind of the connector there that made you really get into the TTRPGs, or what appealed to you about them most?
Um, yeah, I've always been a Tolkien fanatic. I've read the books, watched the movie. I've watched the movies multiple times a year. Uh, it's I've always enjoyed his world building, and that's been a huge inspiration for a lot of the stuff that I do with my own setting. Um, Other than that, yeah, I played a lot of video games. I think my first well, other than like Ocarina of Time, like 64 Zelda stuff like
Right.
that. I think the first one that really hooked me was Fable, The Lost Chapters. I got that when shit, that was so long ago.
It's
um,
been out a while, yeah.
yeah, but that one that's one of my favorite video games, and that one RPGs, fantasy specifically, that's always been my favorite genre of just about anything. But then at a certain point, I started getting into like cosmic, eldritch, like psycho horror kind of stuff, and that's been bleeding into all my work.
You wouldn't say, you couldn't say. Okay.
Yeah.
But what would you say is your greatest strength as a role player? Not so much a storyteller or a game master, but like as a role player as a whole, or a gamer as a whole. What do you think is your best quality?
See, I've never felt like I was a very strong role player. I feel like I handle like as a player, I tend to do a particular task very well. Um, so a lot of the time, I end up building characters that have flaws. I think flaws help me flesh out the appearance of a role play situation. I think, um, but I tend to create the character to like a lot of the time I can't get away from like casters. That's part of the reason that I ended up going with Tremere for Edwin, just because I was like, oh, sorcery. um, and then I design it to complete. Usually, like a wizard, I have them do like utility casting. I want to be able to handle just any situation as a support or damage or whatever the thing is. I build toward a role in the party rather than the character itself a lot of the time.
I think one of the things I've enjoyed most about you as a player and as a storyteller is your creative but tactile thinking. You find like creative ways to use spells or rituals or abilities or even just skills in kind of out of the box ways. When you became a storyteller, you took on the mammoth task of trying to dip into mage and mages without any source material for 5th edition having been published. Still to this day, about mage, you found a way to, well, one, you did your research, you read the 20th anniversary, you really did a deep dive into the setting of mage, but also you homebrewed it. Like you took a lot of stuff and were able to kind of cleverly take what was given in, the black and white text and manipulate it into something that could work with 5th edition. So I think that's just again a testament to your creative thinking, that you're not a black and white player that like it goes by the rules or it doesn't. I think that you just have a very very strong creative sense for these types of things. So, in the world of darkness, you had mentioned flaws. You like making flawed characters. I have yet to see a system overall that I think really encourages creating flawed characters like
Mhm.
World of Darkness. In fact, it demands it. It requires it that your
Yes.
character has certain drawbacks and flaws. The older editions, 20th anniversary, first edition, second edition, they had a massive, massive list of flaws. for your characters to take, and they're kind of starting to go that direction more with fifth edition. But it's
Mhm.
one of the things that I love personally most about the system. So I'd ask you, World of Darkness, what's kind of the most appealing trait about the system itself? Maybe not so much the setting, but the system. What do you like most about the World of Darkness system?
So, I think the way that everything seems so vaguely specific. Um, for example, like flaws. Flaws in Dungeons and Dragons, they're there, especially in fifth edition, but it's kind of like it's not the same. It doesn't provide a mechanical benefit. It's more of a situation of I can probably try to use this and then remind you that hey, you have this flaw here. I'm trying to push you in this direction. Go here.
Right.
Yeah. But with VTM, the way it's very ingrained, I really enjoy the flaw system. The way the way that the game seems to encourage story over just like crunchy mechanics, which I enjoy. That it is still you can still do some wild shit with the mechanic system in the game, but the way that the game itself is designed to push narrative, I enjoy that a lot.
I love the lack of reliance on mechanics in the World of Darkness as well. I love the fact that yes, they do have kind of a very seemingly basic but also extremely flexible mechanic system.
Yeah.
The fact that they call the people running the game storytellers over game masters or dungeon masters, I think to me really speaks to wanting to make it more story based, wanting to make it more less emphasis on mechanics and rules, more emphasis on what is the story that you're telling. But yeah, I have to agree with you. Like character creation is probably one of the coolest parts of the World of Darkness because they have you think about so many elements of your character that you might not think about in like a D&D, where you have to think about like what are they good at, what are they bad at, and what kind of defines them as an individual person. So what appealed to you getting away from mechanics about kind of the setting? You know, we're looking at a setting that is really based on our real world. There's not a lot of fantasy, as it were, and more reliance on horror. What kind of appealed to you about the World of Darkness setting?
Um, One of my favorite series that I read growing up was the Anne Rice Vampire Chronicles. Um, I've always enjoyed the kind of like twisted romanticism with vampirism and things like that. And so seeing that this plays very closely to that kind of narrative, things on that line, the kind of vibe that I enjoy when reading a vampire story resonated with me. I also like the where I like vampire stories a lot of the time because compared to a lot of other horror narratives that you find that usually kind of lean on just slasher or um, crazy just amounts of gore. A lot of the time, vampires use a lot more psychological uh, manipulations or things. Just they play with their fucking food, and I love that. And so I think that's part of the pull for me is because I enjoyed I the thing one of the things I enjoy about DMing was getting to kind of introduce that into a fantasy type setting, and then this is just that's almost all it is. It's just that really like where I in D&D I have like a few moments every once in a while of like I'm about to fuck your shit up, and then that's just constantly VTM. Like every session I'm fucking your shit up somewhere. Like it's
Well, it's funny because we've made a lot of jokes as a staff and, you know, on TikTok and everything about how, and the players make the jokes too of how, like,
yeah.
you're here for the trauma. You're not
Mhm.
here to be the victor. You're not here to be a badass. I mean, you are in a little bit, but that's not the emphasis. You're here. I mean, I think it takes a certain kind of masochistic player to come play the World of Darkness because you are asking for that. You're asking to have in your terms, your shit fucked up. And I think that it's very, very unique in that regard. Like, yeah, people
Mhm.
like challenges, but really they want to be the big badass hero. They want to save the world. They want to, do that kind of thing in most TTRPGs. But in this, it's like I'm here to lose, and I am gonna go as hard as I can into that. And I think that that's a very cool quality. That I do like the manipulative tendencies. I do like the kind of
Mhm.
emphasis on, hey, like, it's a bad situation all of the time. You're
Yeah,
making the best of a shit deal all of the time. And I think,
constantly.
yeah, I think that's really cool. I'm going to throw it over to the chat for a second. We've got a couple of
Mhm.
questions here. Uh, Tumultus asks, what is Beara currently reading, or what did he read last?
It's November. I am currently in the middle of the Silmarillion. Yep.
How many times have you read that book?
What year is it? Let's see. Um,
Is it a seasonal read for you?
I read The Hobbit through the Silmarillion every year starting in November.
Wow. And you're already at the Cimmerillion.
I am.
Nice. Nice. Next question from Truck. He asked, what pushed you to consider and then make what he considers your signature, the escape or final challenge style we saw you use often? He says it gave a lot of good tension without making things feel hopeless. Now, to provide some context, our dear Beara ran several very intense, very trying and challenging sessions during the Theo storyline, many which are here or over on YouTube. So if you want to go back and watch those. But at the end of the sessions, you would usually post kind of like a final act, whether they
Mhm.
were trying to escape, whether they were trying to finish somebody off, whatever the case was, your final challenge or escape. What kind of motivated you or inspired you to implement that kind of philosophy or mechanic?
So that kind of comes back to when you were talking about Mage. I did a lot of homebrewing with Mage. Um, you had I think there's a little stat block at the back of the VTM book that's like, hey, here's a whatever. But
Here's a
um,
magician in
yeah.
vampire terms and
Mhm.
disciplines and abilities. Yeah.
But I wanted to kind of give the feel of what I was seeing Mage to be when I was studying it, reading it. But then at the same time, it was like if I were to create a mage as it's to be created in this writing as I see it, that's gross. It's not going to work in this setting. So I ended up treating a lot of the mage encounters like puzzles. Like the one of the early ones, I had one who could not be physically harmed until you destroyed the crystals that he had bound to him, and then you could kill him. Stuff like that. That ended up resulting in I wanted it to not just be the same thing every time. I wanted it to have some sense of urgency, and I didn't want it to be so easy that everybody could just kind of come in and bang bang move on. So I ended up doing uh, the escape scenario, which kind of bled into the thin blood stuff that I did as well, where I just kind of create three tiers, or not tiers, three segments rather, where they have to do a series of dex and athletic rolls. If they want to do something to try to if they want to try to do something to help better their chances, they could make the argument for it. But generally, it's dex athletics. If you manage all of them, you'll get out just fine. If you get most of them, you might come out a little harmed. And then we've seen what happens if someone fails pretty much all of them.
Well, and you put the
um,
players in a very unique and interesting position in those three acts too, because they would be very reactionary to the success and failure of others as well. So there were,
exactly.
I think, at least more than one occasion where players put themselves, or at least they put their characters at risk because they knew a fellow coterie mate or cellmate, in the case of Hunter, was in very, very dire circumstances. They
Mhm.
would like sacrifice their own success to ensure the success of another. And I think that's such a cool idea. It was such a cool motivator for people to think not just of themselves and preserving their own characters, but the impact that these different acts, these different chapters were having on their fellow players and characters.
Yeah.
Is there a particular session or part of a story or moment in the St. Pete experience you've had so far that really stands out to you as like your favorite or your most dramatic? Like what's your pièce de résistance, as it were, of your St. Pete by Night experience so far? Obviously we still have a lot more to come.
Um, I think it's probably a tie between two. I enjoyed. I think probably the two things that I'm the most proud of are the thin blood ambushes.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I really enjoyed we had to we were getting toward the end of the Theo stuff. And we were trying to hit the deadline to get the stories completed. And the only way that I was able really to do that was basically do 3 back-to-back sessions over a couple of days. And those all got recorded. They're
Mm-hmm. The triple threat.
the triple threat, yeah. That was a lot of fun, and I had a lot of help with that one actually. Like the escape room, I had a lot of help from Crafty
Mm-hmm.
putting that together. But the way that came out and got executed, I'm not the greatest at video editing, but the session itself was a lot of fun. Um, and I think that went well. Other than that, it's the Thin Bloods. I got so into the Thin Blood stuff, just dropping in on people during their sessions and stuff like that, and having something come up. Uh, that I think was probably my biggest. I was really happy with how that played out, I guess.
It was very cool, and I remember, and I believe at least the lead up to it is on YouTube as a past Elysium session. That final
Mm.
assault, that assault on the Elysium, that was a wild session. But I think that I hear about that session a lot because I felt like it was the
Mm.
first kind of perilous. Everybody was into it. Like there were so many moving pieces going on at the same time, and I still hear people talk about that particular encounter. And we had to do quite a bit of work
Yeah.
setting that up because we needed, I think, 3 or 4 different storytellers all running simultaneously in different rooms. Since all these people were gathered together in one room, we had to break them into pieces so that we could run all the different
Yeah.
areas, I guess, of the venue.
Yep.
That was an absolutely wild, but actually one of my favorite moments of St. Pete was that
It was fun.
encounter. It was absolutely crazy. Uh, with the revamp, we had to kind of say goodbye to a lot of stories, some complete, some not complete, as well as a lot of characters. Were there any characters from the previous iteration that you wish you'd had more time with or had a chance to tell a story for that you might not have gotten a chance to or gotten around to? Was there anybody that you wish you'd, character wise, had gotten the opportunity to play with from the previous iteration?
Mm.
You
Uh,
played with a lot of characters, so it would make sense
yeah.
that you got to most of them. But were there any that you didn't get a chance to get your claws in or your fangs in? I suppose.
There were actually a bunch. There were quite a few people I didn't get the opportunity to play much with, that I would have liked to. Story wise, probably the priest,
Oh yeah,
Maurice.
Father Reed. Yeah, Ronsley's character.
Uh, well, the character that was meant to, I had a hunter when Hunter first came out
Right.
that I created that I wanted to target them. Uh, they were going to target like Marguerite Reed, and kind of it was going to be the story of like the morality of what it is to be a vampire, and the idea that you could be this benevolent individual while actively eating people, stuff like that. But with the mage stuff, the thin blood stuff, and scheduling, it was just hard to get that one to go through.
Yeah, yeah, and those were two of my favorite characters that I feel like I only got to get a taste of was like
Mm-hmm.
Marguerite and Father Reed. They were both really, really incredible characters, and their builds were unbelievable. Just like really, really fun. But yeah, I
Shug, I
know that
didn't
you
get to
were
play with Shug at all. Like,
Chug.
yeah, I wanted to play with Shug.
So going over to the chat again, from Champ, what is the most important thing you've learned from being an ST for Vampire the Masquerade or the World of Darkness?
Um, I think it has helped me a lot with improv. Uh, that you can approach any situation in a multitude of ways, and it's made it easier for me to like with D&D, everything's for the most part set in stone. In regard to, there's not a whole lot of flexibility. But even my time here on this server has shown me ways to look at certain skills or pools or uh, to be applied in different ways that I've actually gone over to Dungeons and Dragons and can now spot ways that I can make those skills be a little bit more spread out or applied in different ways. So I guess flexibility, I guess, is what it's taught me the most
Just to be really
since being on the
flexible
server.
between mechanics and story and how to use mechanics that are intended one way for another
Mm-hmm.
way. Okay. Yeah, I definitely agree with that. Again, like as I was talking about earlier, was just the flexibility of the system and the creativity. And like you picked up to that like a duck to water. Like you jumped right in and really did find ways to kind of bend and manipulate the rules to suit what you were trying to do. And a lot more collaboration with players is another thing I find World of Darkness really preaches is like if a player can make a decent argument for a certain skill that wouldn't traditionally be used in a certain
Mm-hmm.
circumstance, there's room for that. There's an opportunity for that.
Absolutely.
So Tumultus asks, "What's your favorite clan lore wise?"
Mm. They are all so good. Um, so I will say it was Tremere for a long time, just because that was the first one I dove into, and there was just so much, and all of it was fucked. But I think over time I am really growing to like Malkavian the most. Nosferatu is up there as well, but Malkavian, yeah,
No,
I've been resonating with that for a bit.
yeah, the Malkavians are complicated, but they're also one of the Tremere and Malkavian actually have a lot of parallels, and I think it's that they are often without enough kind of research or thought put into them, they can be shoved into a box.
Hmm.
Malkavians are often portrayed as fish mouths, which means that they're ridiculously insane. Their solutions for everything are chaotic and nonsensical, which, when played appropriately, can make a very compelling character. But then on the flip side, when played inappropriately, can sometimes be offensive or, you know, over the
Yeah,
top or just ridiculous. And with Tremere, I feel like they get shoved into the wizard box or
yeah,
to the magic user box, which in a lot of ways they are, but there's so much more to them than that. They're intellectuals beyond just what magics they can use or they can do. They have very unique and creative ways. They're experimental. They love experimenting on stuff, sometimes for good, sometimes for bad. Gargoyles. Um, but they love to kind of push the limits of what kindred can do and uncover new knowledges, and I think that that's really carried over to Thin Bloods as well. But I do really think that while Tremere are a very appealing clan to play for those who
Yeah.
love wizards and sorcerers and that kind of thing. I do think that's a much deeper well. I also think they're a little overrated, but that's just me. Um,
Honestly, I've been leaning more toward Hakata as time goes on. I've enjoyed just the crazy fucking culmination of what that is. But Malkavian, I think, has become my favorite.
Absolutely. Going back over the questions, Leisha asks, what has been the most surprising to you as an ST? So this could be something that you figured out through the game, a moment in the game, or what's just surprised you most as an ST? It's kind of an open-ended question.
Mhm. Um, okay, so yes, actually, I do have an answer for that one. I think the thing that was the biggest surprise for me, I've played like I said, D&D since I was 9. I've been DMing since high school. I think the biggest surprise, I'm used to a lot of players being so concerned about what happens to their characters, and then coming to the server and storytelling, and I've done some messed up things to some of these players in their characters, and they are just so excited. um I think it's the attitude. Like, we expect that our characters are likely going to not make it out of any particular situation, and they're excited about it, and that makes me excited to continue telling the story. And that's not something that I got a whole lot before coming here. Now people in my D&D games are now starting to lean that direction as I'm implementing more of the kind of stuff I'm learning from here over there. Or a lot of them have just, oh, I met them on the server and I'm playing with them now, and they're just into the same thing. So
Well,
uh
mechanically, like D&D and games like that, it's all about challenges, overcoming challenges.
mhm,
And I think that, it's viewed in a very sometimes two-dimensional way of just like you have to beat
yeah,
this dungeon, you have to overcome, this big monster or this BBEG. And I think that World of Darkness takes it a step further where it's not an obvious evil all the time. It's not, it's sometimes it's just a psychological barrier you have to overcome or break through. And people love that. Like
mm,
D&D doesn't play in its innately to personal storylines. That's kind of the challenge of the storyteller or the dungeon master in those cases to implement that. Whereas I feel like World of Darkness and Vampire really lay heavily, like they give so much for storytellers to just bite into when it comes to character development, and players love that. Players
yes,
love character development. They love the struggle and overcoming and seeing their enemies from their backstories pop up and seeing, all of that kind of stuff happen. Plus, just overcoming what it is to be a vampire or a werewolf or a hunter, like the struggles that come alongside that. So, yeah, again, it's a very masochistic kind
mhm,
of perspective that players take, but I think that it's also therapy in certain ways. I mean, we've seen
yeah,
people who want more to happen to their characters, and of course, you still see people who want less to happen to their characters. And I think that those players tend to not really get into World of Darkness as much as others. They just want to go on the basic adventure and be the hero. So it is kind of a dividing point. Anyway, I feel like I cut you off. Go ahead.
no, no, not at all. Just kind of coming off what you were saying, I was reminded. I think the biggest example of that experience I had was Islington. Because I went crazy on his backstory, like with pulling his sire and stuff into the mix. And the way that all played out was a lot of fun. And the way I was expecting, like, some the character, as I played the sire, was just horrible. He was an absolutely terrible character, but it made me the response I was getting made me want to do that more. and it surprised me how well that was received. I was expecting to get a lot more like, "Whoa, that was fucked," and then, no, it was just a lot of enthusiasm.
So going back to the questions, Crafty asks, "What was the most unexpected thing a player did during an encounter?" So something that a move that a player made that you were not prepared for or expecting.
Hmm. Yeah, fair enough. Um, I think that probably would be Carmen calling Al mid-session when you were
Okay, so
not present.
why don't you tell us?
Yeah.
Why don't you
So
lay out for us what was happening in that scene that prompted that action?
I was just kind of watching a session play out, and uh, Carmen, a handful of other people were there, but Carmen played my crafty. Um, very easily kind of orchestrated an escape and made it in a way that the escape run was almost nothing. The DC was so low by the time she was done with it for everyone to get away. And then it turned into a car chase situation. So these thin bloods are pursuing them in their car. I think they flipped. Yeah, they lost the car and ended up flipping. And as they're making their way down the road, Crafty just goes, Carmen just goes, I'm gonna call Al. And I don't know which one of us, but one of us messages you and go, "Hey, are you available for something real quick?" And you're like, "Yeah, sure." And you popped in and just ended the encounter. It was like, all right,
Well, and I do
fantastic.
appreciate how flexible you are to kind of moments like that. As unexpected as they are, it
Mhm.
didn't upset you. It doesn't throw you off your game, or you really do have a knack for making sure that the fun still happens, even if it does kind of deflate the balloon you're inflating or prepared to pop. Like you just roll with the punches, and I think that's such a important and fundamental skill for a storyteller. It's why I improvise 99% of the time. Like I might have a storyline kind of outlined vaguely, but I do not go moment by moment in my sessions because it's impossible to know what someone's going to pull out of their back pocket, that they're going to call upon an NPC or someone that's connected to them that can completely redirect everything. And again, you just have a knack for not being thrown, and I think that's so powerful. Where do you think you developed that? Where did that really come into your toolbox, your storyteller toolbox, as it were, that made you so flexible to the unpredictable like that?
I think it was because when I first started, I was so inflexible. When I first GM'd, I I basically wrote a little novel. I had every scene planned out, everything was ready to go, and that crumbled within like 3 sessions. Just because it ended up first time jamming, I did a lot of railroading, which I learned is not fun. So after a little bit of practice, I ended up learning about improv in tabletop. And so I started studying improv a bit. I started playing and watching a lot of improv. Whose Line Is It Anyway was my favorite show for a really long time. Um,
So good.
yeah. So after that, I started around high school. I started writing my own setting, and I kind of changed back into, instead of writing out this wild, crazy book for people to just kind of experience. I eventually started, I call it a skeleton. I have a place where I want the game to start. I have the idea where I want it to end, and I have things that I want to happen kind of in the middle. And as they are going, like, oh, they're currently in town A. I have an encounter in town B. They looked at the map and decided they wanted to go to town C. Okay, that's fine. I'll just shift what I had at town B to town C because my setting is now designed to be flexible as I need it to be. I set it up so that my game is not as set in stone so that I can move with it a little bit better. So there is still prep work. There is a lot of thought that goes into it, but now it's more of along the lines of how can I take what I've already done and apply it to the situation.
So we've talked about a lot of the good of this whole experience, but let's talk about some of the frustrations and bad. We can't talk about St. Pete and Vampire and World of Darkness without discussing some of the more struggling elements we've had. What is your biggest frustration with the World of Darkness, with St. Pete, with kind of everything, and be as honest as you feel comfortable being about it. But what do you think has been the hardest thing about this whole transition, other than the couple of mechanics, learning the roles, that kind of stuff? What's kind of frustrated you the most?
Okay, so for St. Pete itself, I think it's just how impossible it is for me to consider doing any like going elsewhere. I there have been a couple times where I was like, maybe I should just, and then I was like, I can't. I think as for World of Darkness itself, it's the books. It's just the actual books themselves are beyond infuriating to me. I love them. I love the stuff that's in them, but I think the way that they're formatted makes me want to find a bridge. Um, but they are still pretty good about how like the stuff you need is in there. It's just oddly formatted.
Yeah, it absolutely is, and I think that what World of Darkness excels at in
Mhm.
terms of writing is they are amazing world builders and lore crafters. Like,
Yeah.
beyond a shadow of a doubt, over 30 years, they've found ways to surprise me, sometimes, annoy me, but for the most part, they've always written a really good story. And I think that they've tried in some fashion to make the rule books read like a storybook, which they talk about, like, this is the world, these are the clans or the tribes, like they put a lot of information into that kind of stuff, but it takes a while to get to the mechanics. And then they're throwing terminology throughout that you're like, where is this? And you don't find out until it's on page like 141 what that actually is. And it is just kind of like there's a construction issue in the books, because the information is in there, like it is in the books for
Yeah.
the most part. It's just a matter of flipping back and forth, whereas a lot of other rule books, it's like, we're not going to talk about story here, we're just going to give you everything you need to play the game. And then maybe near the end, we'll give you some story ideas or some, outlining emphasis, that kind of stuff. Whereas in World of Darkness, it feels like it's the exact opposite. They're like, here's all the story stuff, and we're going to pepper you with it throughout the entire context of the rule book, because there is so much, because you could get a doctorate in World of Darkness history and lore. Um, that kind of mechanics go by the wayside, and I think that they also trying to stay away from railroading, trying to keep the flexibility. They don't want to give you an answer to questions that we, especially as storytellers, would really just love an answer to. Like, we'd
Mhm.
really love them to tell us, like, what happens when people go to the beckoning? Did Gehenna happen? Like, is this a thing? Is this not a thing? We want to stay true to the world that they've tried to build, and they'll just be like, well, it's up to you. And that could be a very
Mhm.
frustrating element when playing in someone else's sandbox that they've really thoroughly prepared you for. So I totally understand that. Like, the rule books are just, they're a beast unto themselves.
Yeah, it's like when you go to the store to get like pizza sauce, and you go to the sauces, but for whatever reason they keep the pizza sauce in a whole other aisle because that's where they keep the crust. Like,
Yeah, they're
um,
like, you're gonna need this with this, and it's like, yeah, but I also needed it earlier, and you didn't tell me about it then.
mhm,
So now I have to like jump back to where I was when I first heard about this to get the more information that you give me in the second half. Like,
mhm.
yeah, absolutely. What we went into a revamp. We kind of hit a point after 18 months of St. Pete. You were a storyteller for at least 14 of those 18 months, I'm pretty sure. Uh, we hit a point where we kind of had decided that enough was enough. This wasn't sustainable. We couldn't keep up the model we had been using. What were your kind of feelings around that time before we made the actual decision, before we'd actually decided to tear things down and start over to a certain degree? Where were you at after 12 to 14 months of running in St. Pete?
I was feeling spread pretty thin. I was trying to wrap up stories in a way that personal stories, the main story that I've been focusing on, trying to wrap up everything in a way that made as many people satisfied with the ending of the initial iteration and move on. Um, it was, I guess I was just tired. It was just a lot going on, and it just felt constant until we finally got to the end of it.
Yeah, I know from my perspective, and I've talked a lot about this in the server,
Mhm.
burnout was long overdue. We'd hit a point where it was just incessant and endless, and the demands were very, very high because we still had 90 something active
Yeah.
players throughout this entire 14 months. We'd never really saw a solid dip in the player base or even a solid spike. It was just kind of like a constant stream of trying to entertain 90 to 100 plus people at all times. And I was doing 80 hours a week myself, working on the server and on the stories and stuff like that. And I know you had the primary storyline with the Theo story, and that had a lot of moving pieces and stuff going on. So I think that I could speak for the three storytellers we had at the time, you, me, and Mimic, that we were all
Yeah.
pretty significantly burned out. What is your way, or what kind of advice can you give to burgeoning storytellers, dungeon masters, game masters about that point? How do you recognize it? How do you deal with it? And how do you kind of fix it, as it were?
I When I was dealing with burnout, I also had a lot of like personal stuff happening at the same time that made things difficult. Um, I think what ended up helping me was uh, you as a storyteller, your role and enjoyment is just as important at the table as it is for the players. Um, if it gets to a situation that you are not feeling it anymore, whatever was motivating you to write that story to begin with, um, it helps to kind of sit back, take a minute, and consider, try to consider what it is that might be pulling it from you. Because I found that 9 times out of 10, there is a thing that is kind of making it difficult for you to feel that excitement or that passion that you had before. And if you can find out what that thing is, you can either make the adjustment or find if it's something that you can't deal with, then and you can pivot to a new story or step back and take a break altogether. I think just self reflection, I guess, which I think is ultimately what we ended up kind of what brought the revamp to begin with.
Well, I know, again, speaking personally, and I was probably the biggest proponent for the revamp myself was that it was getting to a point where I just didn't want to do it anymore.
Yeah.
Like I had no love for the day-to-day grind. You know, I was running a 24/7 server for 18 months at that point and trying to make myself available for as much of that time as humanly possible. I mean, I couldn't have predicted the demand. I couldn't have predicted the passion and fervor of the players.
Mhm.
I couldn't have predicted any of it. And I think that just saying, you know, it's either this or server death, which is a very, very hard statement to make. It was a very hard thing to say at the time because I loved the characters just as much as the players. I loved the world.
Yeah.
I loved the story. I loved, excuse me, so many different qualities about it, but I just couldn't do it anymore. Like I was dreaming in Discord. I was, having just stress constantly. When I could sleep, I was dreaming in Discord and I wasn't sleeping. And it was a lot of pressure, and I think a lot of the anxiety itself was in having to tell people it was over, having to tell people that
Yeah.
this needed to change and that a full shutdown was necessary and that we needed a fresh start. That was what was causing me the most anxiety. So I think that when it comes to burnout, yes, there's usually a thing, and it's usually something as simple as just overcoming the fear and anxiety of saying this is over, this is done.
Yeah.
That kind of responsibility or pressure to decide to finally, or to keep it going, to keep it going. That pressure is there because you have expectation from your players, even though you are also a player. Like you said, the storyteller also needs to be having fun. This isn't a job. Most of the time you're not getting paid, and if you are getting paid, it's probably not amazing. um, and it's one of those things where it's just you have to make that call. But there is, like you said, there's always a thing, whether it's a particularly problematic player, a very difficult conversation you need to have, like outside influences, real life things going on, where you have to make that decision that, like, this is a hobby, this needs to take a back burner to my real life, like this is actually having a negative impact on me despite it being my fun escapist thing. you
Hmm.
know Whatever the case may be, there, you're right, there is always that thing. And it definitely was for me, just having to tell players I couldn't do it anymore. That was my big thing, and once I finally admitted that to myself, admitted that to the mod team, and admitted that to the players, I felt so much of that stress and burnout go away. Like I felt it. That's what had been weighing me down, was just admitting I wasn't having fun and I wasn't able to keep doing this. Um, but with the revamp came a lot of benefits. Of course, there were some struggles during the transition process. We did see several players leave the server. We saw a lot of hard feelings. We saw a lot of frustrations, which are understandable. As having been a player, having been a storyteller, a lot of people came to TTRPGs during the pandemic, so they haven't been at it for 30 years, or over a couple decades. They haven't had that experience. So it is, I could understand where they were coming from, but I also know that, personally speaking, a lot of that hurt.
Yeah.
Seeing the players really kind of go through that process, having felt like you've dedicated so much time and so much energy to their enjoyment, and to see them lash out when you say, "Hey guys, I can't do this anymore." Uh, that really hurt. Uh,
Yeah.
were there any was there any kind of struggles that the end brought for you? Did you find yourself dealing with any personal problematic issues, or did you think that it was kind of like a good thing at the time versus overall? Obviously, overall, we all think it was a good thing because
Yeah.
we're
Not like
alive
I
and
remember,
kicking. But
I remember when you made the announcement to the mod team, I just immediately was like, all right. Okay, yeah, no, I'm for this. Let's. Um, but I think the thing that just made it most difficult was it was taking up so much of our time that I didn't see I didn't see some things coming that I should have. And when certain things happened in my personal life that knocked the wind out of my sails and made it really hard to come back and do other stuff on the server. But then we got through it. We got through the stories and stuff and took the break to recharge for coming back. Um, and yeah, I think that really like coming back from revamp doing the coterie style instead of the uh, kind of West March LARP that we were doing before definitely
Question,
was a improvement.
yeah, question from Champ in the chat. What, in your opinion, has made switching to coteries easier as a storyteller?
Um, Not stepping on people's toes as much. Like there were things where I was trying to do something where I ended up clash. There were a couple times where I almost clashed with something another storyteller was doing because all of the stuff was happening in the same place at the same time. So trying to uh, participate in certain stories or things along that line, try to enhance some things. Uh, Having the table itself, I don't have to worry about anything that I'm doing having too grand of an impact on somebody else. It's the table and it cuts off there for the most part. We have a couple things that we're doing, but it's not as intense as it was before.
Yeah, absolutely. So, would you say that you, I think this is a redundant question, but would you say that you prefer this new model versus the old model?
100%, yes.
But what were some takeaways from the old model that kind of helped you in as a storyteller or as a game runner? What are some things that you learned from that first experience? Because I personally learned a ton. It was an
Yeah.
extremely valuable experience, and I think that if I were to try it again ever in the future, there's a lot I learned that I would know to prepare for. But what were some takeaways that you had from the first iteration that you carry with you into this revamp, into this new iteration?
Coming into the new iteration, I think what I brought is there were I got to play with a lot of people and I got to see how different people respond. And there were very rarely that I can't think of any two players that handled anything with a similar approach. And I think having that many people so constantly uh breaking the stuff I threw at them gave me a wide spectrum of uh variables to anticipate when building encounters moving forward. Um so I guess the word I'm looking for is like a variety in
Well, yeah, it also reminds me you were talking about flexibility earlier too. Like when you
yeah,
didn't know who you were going to be playing with at any given moment, that you could hop into a scene with people you've played before hundreds of times and people you've never played before. You had to stay kind of open to anything. And I
yeah,
think that, yeah, it taught a lot of valuable skills in regards to just how to be open to any different play style at any different time, that it doesn't take as much like, okay, I got to step back and think about this for a long time before approaching a different style of group. You can just kind of flip on a dime, like, okay, now this person's in the scene and they're bringing a different kind of energy. I have to be able to match or, compete with that energy to keep the story rolling. Because you're working with a lot of players of varying styles and backgrounds in this new iteration. Some that you really didn't get any time with previously, or very little time with previously. And it
yeah.
seems like, at least from an outsider perspective, you're taking to it very easily.
Uh, yeah, I think so. I do have some experience with a few of the players at the tables that I'm currently running. Um, but yeah, between St. Pete and just GMing for a living, I have to get used to playing with a bunch of people that I don't know very well. So I think that helped. And but definitely, I think just the rapidness of the previous iteration, I think has helped a lot. And just because now I don't have to plan for 100 people, I'm just planning for like 12-ish, and it's very easy to figure out, okay, this is how you're going to play. I can build around that, and I can kind of get an idea of the range that a person is going to be providing. um there are still a couple people that are going to mess me up no matter what. uh I In order to refamiliarize myself with VTM, because I did everything through Mage in the previous iteration, I started a game that you're playing in. You I don't think I'm ever going to be fully prepared for like you, Crafty, and Kyrie. Um, Anytime I have a session with y'all, you do something just off the fucking wall, and I'm gonna have players like that. But generally speaking, I think mostly it's usually like a cone that people kind of operate in.
One of the most wild experiences is running for storytellers or dungeon masters or game
Yeah.
masters, because all of the stuff they've learned, all of the like stuff they've held back on comes just exploding out when they're a player. Like they are
Mhm.
trying all the crazy shit that they've seen other players try, or stuff that they've been inspired to think of and try, just comes all out over the place. And so I think it's fun. I think it's great, but I also think it's just like, holy crap.
Mhm.
Like, it is a beast unto itself to run for a forever DM or storyteller, because
Yeah.
they are just ready to cut loose. Like, they make some of the best and worst chaos goblins of all time because they've just got so much that they have in the tank. So the
Mhm.
two things left I want to talk about is a little bit about your current games that you're running,
Yeah.
and again about you as a professional DM, which I think is the coolest thing in the ever. So we'll save the professional DM for last on our out. But tell us a little bit about the games you're currently running. Now we do have some of your players watching right now, so kind of be mindful of what you
Yes.
want to give away. But you proposed, you currently have two games running. One,
Mhm.
a Anarch Coterie, and the other a Camarilla Coterie. So you're kind of playing both sides of the fence in this one. But from what I know of your stories, two wildly different tales unfolding. What can you tell us about each of those games without giving away too much? Or at least what kind of like themes or tones did you
Yeah.
have for those games?
Okay. Um, yeah, so I've got the two games. I have Bloody Strings, which is Camarilla. That one is I took a lot of inspiration on that one kind of from uh a lot of like psychological police dramas, I guess. Very The murderer is going to be fucking with your head, and they're going to be uh one step ahead of you until you figure out what it is that they're doing to stay ahead. There's Without going into too much uh detail, essentially the players are members of the Camarilla, and they have been asked by the uh keeper and by the Primogen Charlie to investigate a series of murders, as somebody seems to be targeting Malkavians. As they're going through, they're finding these bodies and trying to piece stuff together, figure out what's going on. Um, as it kind of turns into a bit more of a game of cat and mouse with whoever this killer is. The other one um, is a little bit more direct. This one has a little bit more of the gory side of. I kind of view them as two sides of like the same kind of coin. One is more along the lines of the psychological aspect. The other one's more of the body horror gore side of things. That one is Anarchs in Palm Harbor have been tasked by Ian to the Baron to uh, and to get rid of this would be Baron moving in on his territory. They go and they find a lot of just horrible, messy situations, and they're going to have to try to deal with that guy, or else see what comes of it. That one, I think I took a lot of inspiration off of my Thin Blood stuff because I felt like that didn't get to. Not a whole lot of people got to experience that, so I wanted to, without just doing the same thing and something a little bit more focused, I moved toward a slightly different way of accomplishing that.
And how do you think your coteries are doing so far? Let's stir the trauma pot a little bit. And I'm not saying how are they doing as players. I know the
Yeah.
players, I know the games, they're phenomenal. I'm sure and it seems like they're all having fun and getting invested. I mean, how are the characters doing on following these stories? Would you say they've made any gross missteps? Would you say they've kind of overplayed their hand a little bit? Would you say, how do you think they're doing in the vaguest but most titillating way possible?
Hmm. Okay. The Camarilla game is very. They are very good at catching hints, catching cues, uh, spotting clues, regardless how subtle or blatant they are. Um, they honestly seem to be more of a. They bounce off each other really well, and I think that what I am seeing is that they're almost less concerned about the task as they are each other, and I think it's that. I think that's probably what I'm going to have to lean into to make the threat seem more relevant. The other group, the Anarchs, that game started a little bit later, still pretty early in that one, but I think that one's going to be a bit of people trying to. I think they need to figure out as the game progresses that this is a as much as it is you are trying to get rid of this guy, there is a lot of really dangerous things going on, and it's going to you can't charge into a lot of it head on. Some things you can. Obviously, there are obviously things that you can do, but for certain things, it is not great to beat your chest and charge into it. That's not going to fix a lot of it. And I think if they figure that out, then they'll be fine.
So you're pre-recording these sessions and
Mhm.
episodes, which we'll be planning on airing at some point in the next few weeks, or at least starting to air in the next few weeks here on Twitch and on YouTube. What's kind of a teaser or a hint you can give viewers to expect from these upcoming stories or from what's happened so far? What's something that you can say to kind of hook them into checking out those episodes when they do air?
The villain for the Camarilla game is a character that has been seen and can be seen in the previous iteration. The villain for the Anarch game has been around but is quiet and has just started to make a very noisy introduction.
Huh? So we are going to be airing those episodes, like I said, starting in the next few weeks. We wanted to get a few in the can so we didn't have any interruptions in our scheduling or our episode progressions as we get into the holidays and whatnot. So stay tuned here on Twitch for all of that. It's Bloody Strings, and what was the name of the other chronicle, if you can remind me?
Yeah, Bloody Strings and Remnants of a Silent Throne.
Bloody Strings and Remnants of a Silent Throne. So stay tuned to Twitch or to YouTube to check those out. You'll know which ones they are. They'll have the title of the games right at the very front as they start to air. But I know I'm personally looking forward to it. I've always been a huge fan of yours. I've always had the fun opportunity in the previous streams, and at least most of them, to sit and watch as as a rabid viewer as you were weaving your yarns and telling your stories. But I've had to sit on the sidelines of this one and just hear secondhand kind of what's been happening in your session. So I know I'll be tuning in. I hope the viewers will be tuning in when those do go live, whether it's at the time that it airs or on repeat play. So let's talk a little bit more about you as a professional dungeon master, storyteller, GM, and I'm going to bring up the business page here again for everyone to see. So you are working with startplaying.games as a professional dungeon master, GM. How did you get into that? How did you find out about that, and what kind of enticed you about getting involved in this particular community or with this particular site and organization?
So, I ended up kind of falling into this uh, May 2021. I was working for a cable company right before the pandemic started. Uh, and as I kind of, after everything kind of kicked off, I ended up backing out of that. And it got really hard to find work for a while. I live in Knoxville, Tennessee, and finding anything was a pain. Um, but I was running a game for a few friends of mine, and one of them apparently knew somebody who operated on the website. They showed it to me, and I started doing some research and decided I'd try my hand at it. I've been doing it since then. That's part of the reason I started TikTok, was to try to advertise for that. But then I ended up just kind of getting swept off into all the TTRPG TikTok stuff that everybody was doing, and it just kind of became that. um, I think after about, I was getting kind of frustrated with it. It's very hard to kind of get into, especially on Start Playing, because you have to get your reviews up, things like that. So I ended up doing a lot of free work on there for a really long time. But then things started becoming more regular. I started getting a couple of games. It has been a trip, but I've enjoyed doing it, and it's something I'm passionate about. And words are not working with me right now.
Well,
I'm going blank.
how do those games kind of compare to the games you run here on St. Pete?
Hmm.
We're not wealthy enough to start paying you yet, but we're hoping to in the future at some point. How do those kind of experiences as a storyteller or as a game master, how do they kind of differ? Do you feel a certain amount of pressure or responsibility with the paid games more than regular games, or do you just kind of run them the way you run them regardless of whether there's money coming in or not?
I run them how I run them, which I like. I have my own terms and conditions. I have my own rules at the table for people and stuff like that. If I find a table's not working, I go, hey, I can't run this table anymore. I think that's part of the thing I enjoy about it is the freedom of it. I'm doing something that I enjoy, and I don't have somebody standing over me and telling me how to do it. I can figure that out for myself, and whoever vibes with that pays me to run the game for them. I've run D&D, Call of Cthulhu, like you said. I've started I think I've already put on the website. I've started doing the V5 stuff. Um, I've gotten to meet a lot of really cool people. I've gotten some wild experiences just from requests and stuff like that that people have made, and I've had some hiccups. But overall, I think I've enjoyed the experience so far.
Well, this ties in nicely to a question from Tumultus from the chat. When starting a game, how do you screen players, especially if you don't know them?
So a lot of the time, my process has to do with I usually spend a good little bit kind of sitting down with people talking about like session zero. This is the setting. This is the kind of things that we have here. Here's what you can do. Here's what uh, you might want to avoid. Here are my rules. Here are the expectations. All that stuff. Do you guys have any things that you want to see? All of that, and then after I do that, I'll get with each of them, usually individually, kind of work on creating their character, tying their story into the setting. Um, and then sometimes some tables I'll do a like session point 5 where I'll run like a little one-on-one with the character, let them kind of figure out their character through role play a little bit and navigate the setting, and then set them up for the start of when the game actually takes place.
Right.
It's usually what I do. Sometimes if I know the table well enough, I can just trust everybody to create their characters. They have their stories and stuff, and we just jump right in. But if I don't know them, it's usually a bit more drawn out.
What tips would you give to having been an experienced, professional game master storyteller so far? What tips would you give to somebody who wants to become a dungeon master or a storyteller or a game master? You've kind of gone through all of, or at least a lot of, the trials and tribulations of doing this, and I know that there are a lot of people who have an interest, who are inspired and get excited about the idea of it. What kind of tips would you give them into getting started?
Your the story that you are wanting to tell is worth telling, but if you're going to be doing it through a tabletop, you need to accept that you are no longer the author, you're the co-author of that situation, and you need to not when your players do something that's off the wall, you need to not get upset. You need to embrace that and accept that as just as much your idea as it is theirs, because then you can appreciate what it is that they've done, and you can make that if you are enjoying the actions that they are taking in something you're creating, then you are going to make or better and more organic uh consequences that fill out the setting. The rules are just there to help. You can toss out the whole fucking book if it makes the game more fun. um just relax and figure out what works for you and your table.
Collaborative. Storytelling is collaborative in its very nature. If you wanted it to be you dictating to an audience, be a writer. Write a book. If you want to
Mm-hmm.
control and manipulate and navigate every single detail of the story, write it down. It doesn't mean it's a bad story. It doesn't mean that you're not talented. It just means that it's not the right medium for that particular story to be told. I think gaming is extremely collaborative. Like, choose your own adventure books, which some of us that are nearing 40 or almost at 40 remember. were very, very popular, but they were all preordained and written. The decisions weren't up to the characters, and no matter what decision you made, they knew where you were going to go and what was going to happen. That's not gaming. That is
Mhm.
not storytelling. If you have the preordained outcomes, you are more likely to railroad your players. You are more likely to say that it doesn't really matter what decision you make, this is going to happen regardless. And I think that players, especially, eventually start to pick up on that. They start to realize, like, this outcome didn't make sense for what I was doing or what I was intending or what the dice even dictated should have been the result. And I think that that's where you lead to a lot of players having issues with that kind of thing, like with that kind of storytelling. Some players are fine with it. Some just want you to take them on the journey, but those are very few and far between. I do not think you're going to find a full party of people who just want to be dictated at the whole time. They
Right.
want to feel like what they do makes a difference or has an impact, and that it's not simply all this kind of preordained
Hmm.
dictation. You know what I mean? So I definitely agree with that 100%. I think that flexibility, being willing to say, this isn't my story anymore the minute it begins. Like the minute you have your first session, you lay out your intro speech, you get the characters first get into character. That story is no longer just yours. It doesn't belong to you. It was inspired by you, it was created by you, sure. But it's no longer from that point forward yours. It is everyone's at the table. It's a shared experience and they are adding to it just as much, sometimes even more than you are. They
Hmm.
are, they're contributing a great deal to it because a story without characters is a painting. It's a frozen moment. Like it's not, you
Yep.
need the characters to make the story breathe. So I think that's absolutely 100% very valid advice. What kind of skills do you think people need to work on other than flexibility, or how much knowledge do you think someone has to have of a game before they can start storytelling it?
None. I, I don't think I think it's perfectly acceptable to have never played a game before, pick up a book and start trying. Um, if you if you wanted to get into BTM, you just gotta figure out the book and then you can more or less run it. It's not. I think it's more along the lines. I think the best skill that you can probably get is being flexible to work on. I think getting into improv was the biggest uh, boon to my storytelling. Um, it makes the decision like if you get to where you can kind of make decisions off the cuff, it makes everything feel more organic a lot of the time. Um, Sometimes you say something stupid and then it doesn't work out, but then it's funny and it's a y'all laugh about it later. But I don't think you need to know anything before getting into something. I think you just if you're going to do it, be passionate about it and the fun will come after.
And also, I think that if at first you don't succeed, try again. Keep pushing. The amount of terrible games and stories I've run in my 30-year plus career are vast, are absolutely vast. I
Mhm.
still tell terrible stories even with all my experience. All my best intentions are going to be diddly poop, when it comes to how the players receive it, how they react to it, how they, it might rub some the wrong way. You just have to keep trying. You have to
Mhm.
pick yourself up. Just because a story didn't go the way you wanted it to, try it again with a different party. You'd be surprised. You're going to get a completely different game. So don't give up on story ideas or settings. Take them, retool them. It's again, it goes back to like being an author. You're going to get feedback. You're going to get responses. You're going to see how people react to stuff. Take that and use those skills or those lessons you've learned for the next time you run, because I know it's a very intimidating prospect as a new storyteller or a new game master to jump into something. And just because you're not Matt Mercer or Beara the Bard or anything right out the gate doesn't mean you don't have the potential to be amazing and great. Those people have Beara, and I'm talking about you in the third person, but Beara, myself, Matt Mercer, all these people started somewhere, and it was garbage. It was terrible. And they had to keep doing it over and over and over again to get to the point that they're at now. That being said, maybe it's not for you also. And you have to be okay with that too. If you don't feel it, if it's not clicking for you, if you're not still feeling excited at the prospect, or like you want to learn more, or you're willing to go over those hills and those speed bumps to do this, maybe it's not for you, and that's not a bad thing. It's not a failing on anyone's part. It takes a particularly insane individual to do what we do. You have to be a very special brand of crazy to be a storyteller or a dungeon master or a game master, because it is absolute madness, and you are going to have ups, you are going to have downs, and you are just going to keep asking for more, and keep coming back to it. And so I definitely admire anyone who sticks with it and keeps going, because failure is most certainly going to outrank success. Like, you are going to have more failures than you're going to have more success. You're going to have more starts and stops in games then you're going to have successful, fully played out chronicles. And that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. It doesn't mean you were a bad storyteller because a game didn't go to its conclusion. It doesn't mean you were, a failure of a person because players dropped out. None of that is the case. It's just the way of it. It's the process. The biggest enemy of gaming is scheduling. So most of the time, games fall apart because of scheduling. It's not because they didn't want to play. It's not because they didn't like your story. It's not because you failed as a storyteller. You just have to keep pushing forward. There are always people wanting to play all the time, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. There are services like Start Playing if you want to go the professional route, but there are also ones that just offer free games where you could learn from other storytellers. You could try with other players. You could keep throwing yourself into the lion's den. And I think anyone has the potential to become a storyteller, but they have to have the motivation and the drive and the willingness to realize that nobody is perfect. Nobody is good. Just the other week on my werewolf stream, I was flubbing over words like a maniac on stream. It happens, and that's okay. I don't think I'm a failure, and I'm not going to stop doing it because I made a complete ass of myself because I couldn't remember the name of the car I created. Like, it's a part of it, and that's okay. What do you got to say?
I was about to say, yeah, along the same vein, I was playing D&D with my group on Wednesday, and now there's an eternally burning bra in a dungeon because I said the wrong word. I said brazier instead of brazier. It
Yeah, absolutely.
happens.
It's okay, and if you have the strength and the confidence to pick yourself up and keep going after that, I would love to play in one of your games. Doesn't matter how long you've been doing it. I'm not picky. I'm not going to say, like, oh, I'm only going to play with people who've been doing this for 5 years. I'll play in a first time DM's game. I don't care because if they're as passionate about it as I was and am, they're going to do an amazing job, even if it takes a little bit of time to get there. So I definitely encourage, if you want to be a storyteller, whether it's for St. Pete, whether it's in your own chronicle, whether it's, in a different system altogether, take the leap and just do it. Like Beara said, you don't need to know the rules. You don't need to know, be an expert. You don't even need to have played this system before. Just pick it up and start running it. But if you're going to do that, and I think you'll agree with me on this, and I'd love to hear your thoughts, transparency is important. Be honest with your players. Say, hey, this is my first time running this game. I don't know the rules. And either A, I'm willing to learn, because you might have a few rules lawyers at the table who are very, very knowledgeable, or just say, I don't care. We're not using rules as written. We're trying something. I'm just using inspiration from it. Be honest with your players. If your players know what they're getting into, they will be much more respectful, much more appreciative, and give you an easier time with it. Whereas if you just say, let's play some vampire, people are going to expect you to know the rules if you don't tell them that you don't know them, or if you aren't
Yeah.
flexible into learning them. You just got to say, hey, these are the terms and conditions of me running a game for you. Here's everything you need to know about what I know about this game. What are your thoughts on that?
No, absolutely. Like I said, I started in 3.5 D&D when I was in college. Fifth edition had been out for a little bit, but I never owned a book, never even saw one. But my friends wanted to play D&D. They asked me if I'd run a game, and they were playing fifth edition. I was like, I don't know the differences, and they're like, it's all right. We got together, we talked about all that, and they just handed me the books, said start running something. And best way that I learn a game is to just run it, and then when something comes up, I need to know how to handle that. I learn it in that moment, and then I have something to connect that to. Um, and everybody, if you have a table of cool people that you can trust, then that's yeah, you're going to learn the game really fast, and that's not really a problem. But most people are going to be cool about you not knowing what you're doing. They'll help you. Um, I think it's yeah, I agree with you. I think that's perfectly fine. I think court transparency is very important.
Yeah, never stop learning. You're never
Mhm.
going to be a master at this. You're never going to be an expert at this. You're going to know a lot the longer you do it. I don't consider myself an expert in World of Darkness. I don't consider myself an expert in storytelling or game mastering or dungeon mastering or anything. I am far from that. I am constantly learning. Even Beara, who, I've only been able to, or fortunate enough to associate with for these past couple of years, I've learned so much from him. When we did the revamp and he posted all the information from his table, so many of his fellow storytellers were like, "Can I use that? Like you you really explained that really well," or like, "I really like this table rule you have or this process you have." So it doesn't matter if you've been doing it 1 year or 25 years, you're gonna be learning constantly. And if you're not flexible to learning more, it's gonna be a short story. It's gonna be a short road for you. Um, Nobody is the best at this. Nobody. Such a thing doesn't exist. Gaming is so subjective. Stories are so subjective. Nobody is the best. There are some really, really great ones, but nobody is the best. So, Beara, is there anything you would like to plug this evening? Anything you'd like to promote, or any final thoughts or words you'd like to say to these wonderful viewers who've stuck with us for almost the past 2 hours?
um, Thank you for stopping by and listening to me rant for about an hour. Um, uh, if anybody is interested in picking up a game, I do mostly custom games, and I keep it on the website. So something to start playing. You can also, if you want to talk about any of that, you can just reach out to me on Discord. It's just Beara.
Yep. He's also on social media, TikTok, all the others. Beara the Bard. Go check him out there. And again, go check him out on Start Playing. I've posted the site here for you again. He's a fantastic, fantastic DM, a fantastic storyteller. I couldn't recommend him highly enough. I play in one of his regular games, and I have an absolute blast playing with him. So go check him out at startplaying.games/gm/Beara.the.bard and go join one of his tables. You never know what's going to happen. If you've got the cash, throw it his way. He well deserves it and would be an excellent, excellent person to play with in the future if you have that ability to do so. Beara, thank you so much for joining me tonight. This is our second ever After Dark special, and I think it was a complete success. Thank you so much to everybody who is viewing in the chat. We had an average of 12 to 14 viewers this entire time, and we really, really appreciate you sticking with us. We really appreciate your questions. This coming week, we have episode 3 of Rage Across Tampa airing on Tuesday night at 10 p.m., I believe, maybe 9 p.m. Check the schedule. I can't remember time. We've also got another After Dark starting a little bit later at 10 p.m. next week, in which case we're going to have another storyteller kind of profile interview with the one and only Crafty Mirage. So come back and tune in for that. We appreciate you. We love you. Keep playing your games. Keep living out your crazy fantasies. And we will see you next time here on the St. Pete by Night Twitch stream. Have a good night, everybody.